Welcome to a new episode of the Sports Mecca podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Abramo. As always, I'm joined by my co host, Sam Mangeli. Today, we are joined by ESPN college basketball and college sports play by play broadcaster Mark Neely to break down the 2024-25 Big 12 men's basketball season so far. Mark, thank you again for coming on the podcast. We've had you several times, so another evening of having you on is a treat.
Stephen, Sam, always good to be with you guys, and it's always fun this time of year because we seem to always reconnect right as we get towards the back half of Big 12 play and are kind of sprinting towards the conference tournament and NCAA tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this past Saturday, so 2 days ago, the men's college basketball committee, they're in charge of the different reveals of the top 16 seeds, and five of them on Saturday are from the Big 12. It's Iowa State, Arizona, Houston, Kansas, and Texas Tech. But Kansas was the only one of those teams that had a big loss that most likely is going to take them out of the top 16 when they do it this upcoming Saturday. So, your thoughts on the top 16 and having the Big 12 have five of the representatives in there?
Yeah, Stephen, not a lot of surprises. I think it gives teams their first look at kind of where the committee or the NCAA sees them going into the NCAA tournament, at least with about a month or so left before you get into it. But uh, Kansas has never been worse than a 4 seed, I believe, under Bill Self. There's a pretty good chance that may change this year. You know, they could be a 5. Heck, they could be a 6. And we'll see how it ends up with Kansas. I mean, they have a big game tomorrow night as we speak here. Uh, they're going to have to go to BYU in a very tough environment and try to win there. Then after that, they have winnable games against Oklahoma State and Colorado, but finish with 3 really tough ones with Tech and Houston and Arizona. So it's going to be trying time for Bill Self, who seems about as exasperated as he has been at this time of year, trying to get it all clicking, especially defensively. It's just not there right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some numbers the last 2 years for Kansas. In Big 12 play, they're currently 18 and 15. They've had their Big 12 opening streak snapped, which you got the opportunity to call that game, and Steven and I we were at that game. And then they also ended their 42 year streak of not losing three straight in Manhattan. They also lost to Missouri this year. And they've had their biggest blown lead against Baylor when they were up 19 at the half. They were up by 21, I believe. They blew that lead and lost by 10 that game. They've had 8 double-digit losses, 4 by 20 plus. They've been 6 and 14 on the road, 5-11 in Big 12 play. So a lot of discouraging numbers there the last 2 years. But one of the big discouraging numbers is the transfers for Kansas. AJ Storr, 16.8 points a game at Wisconsin, 6.3 at Kansas. Rylan Griffin, 11.2 points a game on 39% shooting, 6.5 points per game, 35.6 from three. Zeke Mayo has been the bright spot for this Kansas team. But you can really see the like home and away discrepancies for this Kansas
Yeah.
team where Zeke is averaging 18.5 game 5 points a game at home on 45% shooting from outside, but away from Allen Fieldhouse, 11 points a game on 31.1 percent from three. So definitely a very frustrating last 2 years for the Kansas Jayhawks.
Tell you what, Sam, you've painted a very bleak picture for Kansas fans. I don't know if they're used to that, and I think the big part of that is now, as you get towards the end of the regular season, and now you're looking at the conference tournament downtown at T-Mobile Center, they're going to have to do well in the conference tournament. I mean, and they're going to be playing earlier than they normally are used to. And the other part of that equation is usually when Kansas is a 1 or a 2 seed, the NCAA would keep them relatively close in those first rounds. You know, like this year, there's Wichita is one of the sites where if they're a 1 or a 2, they may have gone there, you know, or it's Omaha. So now they're, who knows, as a 5 seed or a 6 seed, they could go anywhere.
Mhm.
and that's going to make it harder on Jayhawk fans to travel. And they've been so good at doing that throughout the years. So it's a weird time for Kansas basketball. But I don't put anything past Bill Self. I still think he's the best at what he does. And again, that's no slight towards the other coaches that are out there. There's some great ones in college basketball, a lot of great ones. But like I tell Kansas fans, who else would anybody that I hear that's a Kansas fan that starts criticizing Bill Self, and everybody's open to criticism, but I'm like, you don't want Bill Self, who are you going to get? Who are you going to get after Bill Self, man? No, Bill's the guy. So we'll see if he can get it together. But I know he is been very exasperated trying to put the pieces together with this team.
Did you call Big 12, or sorry, not Big 12, but did you call a lot of college basketball games or no, follow Kansas basketball in the Roy Williams era? Because this does seem a
Yeah,
little similar to what Roy Williams faced in the late 1990s, early 2000s before Nick Collison, Kirk Heinrich, Drew Gooden, became part of the program and then really were developed.
yeah. I've certainly followed Kansas basketball for a long time. One of the more disappointing losses, I think, for most Kansas fans, and this takes me back. Miles Simon, who was my partner for a lot of Big 12 games for a number of years, whenever we'd go into Allen Fieldhouse, Kansas fans were very respectful, but many of them would come up to Miles and say, "Hey, we love you on the air and respect what you do, but your Arizona team just put a stake in our heart." What was that? The '98 team.
97.
97 team. I mean, that was a really, really good Kansas team that I think lost to Arizona in the Sweet 16.
Mhm.
And then Arizona went on and beat Kentucky in overtime in the national title game. So they've had some great teams and maybe a little bit of a drought for the high standard that Kansas sets for Kansas basketball after that. But most years in and out, you're thinking Kansas is going to be a 1-2 seed, and it's going to be different this year. I mean, that seems like far fetched pipe dreams right now that Kansas, maybe if they really piece things together, could get back to a 3, but it's looking more like a 4, 5, 6 at this point.
Just what you mentioned, it does speak to the consistency that Bill Self has put together, where they've never been lower than a 4 seed. And it is uncharted territories of how also they're going to be playing early in the Big 12 tournament because for so long they've been either a 1 seed or a 2 seed in the Big 12 tournament, and they'll have a bye. And I guess if they were a 1 or 2 seed this year, they would have had a double bye. So much different feeling for Kansas fans and the program. But on the flip side, instead of talking about a team that's underperforming, let's talk about a team that's delivering and playing really well right now, and that's the Houston Cougars. They
Mm-hmm.
won the conference outright last season, and now they're in a position to win it again for back-to-back seasons. They have a lot of depth and they have a lot of scoring that's really well rounded. They have four guys that are averaging double figures. So talk about what Houston has been doing, and then just your impressions on their season and if they are better than what they were last year.
Yeah, Steven, I look back to last year, and if Jamal Shed does not get hurt, I think for sure Houston's at least in the Final Four, and maybe they win the national title. We'll see. But losing Jamal Shed when they did that deep into the tournament was just crushing. And I remember watching that game on TV, and I was bummed out for everybody in Houston and Jamal Shed to see it end like that. So they don't have Jamal Shed this year, which is one of the few differences from a year ago, but it is a big difference. But they have the pieces. They certainly have the defense. It comes to play every night with Kelvin and his son. That they make sure that the offense can kind of come and go, but the 3-point shooting at stages this year was really, really good. I mean, Sharp was as sharp as anybody. He was up close to 40% at one point. So if they can kind of stay healthy, the defense is a big deal, especially in the NCAA tournament. So I give them a pretty good chance, as good as anybody in the Big 12, obviously, to make the Final Four this year.
Yeah, Sam alluded to it about the Kansas Jayhawks struggles, but Do you feel that that comeback win that Houston had, where they had to win in regulation and then they were down again late in overtime, ultimately winning double overtime, really speaks to the culture that Calvin Sampson has built at Houston?
Definitely so. And Stephen, I think it gives you a good idea. I mean, since that game when Kansas looked like they had a one in regulation and then had a one in the first overtime and then lost in the second, since that game, Kansas is they've just been this. It's up and down and mainly down. And Houston was pretty invincible as it was before then. They would not have been devastated had they lost on the road at Allen Fieldhouse. But to come back and win that game and pull it out of the fire, I think has added a little more. And since then, Arizona's lost, kind of fallen off the pace a couple of games after they were on a big hot streak. So Houston is in command to win the regular season, but that's not their main goal. I mean, yeah, they'll take it and they'll make it back-to-back years that regard, but they want to finish where they got abruptly cut off when Jamal Shed got hurt at that point of the tournament, and I wouldn't put it past them, man. They're a solid. Again, their defense. I've watched them at times where their defense, where teams, everything is just so hard. It's like for the other team to score right now, it's they just make everything so difficult, and there aren't many teams like that.
One big stat for Houston last year from three, they were shooting 34.8%. This year, they're shooting 39.1%. So their shooting has definitely improved, which felt like that was an issue for them in the past couple years, why they may have came up short. So having that being able to shoot from the outside now gives them a much better chance, I feel like, making a Final Four than it did a couple years ago.
Yeah, for sure. And Sam, there are some games where the 3-point shooting just isn't there. Some nights the shots aren't falling. I saw that last week at the Arizona at K-State game when neither team really could hit a three, and usually each team's fairly successful at it. So you just have to avoid that particular night in the NCAA tournament. But Houston's built to make a Final Four run.
Mm-hmm. So three freshmen that come to mind of guys that have really performed well in their first year in college is Arizona State's Jaden Quaintance, Baylor's VJ Edgecombe, and BYU's Igor Demon. Out of those three, who has really stood out to you the most? And if you want to mention any other freshmen in the Big 12, also you may.
That's a pretty good trio that you just put together there, Steven. So I'll stick with them, and they're all going to be first round picks, and some of may all three be lottery picks. Who knows? We'll see. But I think for me, it's Quaintance just because he's 17 years old, not quite 18. His frame, his build looks like an NBA player already, and he seems to be very highly intuitive with the game, and something that's off the court. He seems like a really sharp guy that's got other interests. I mean, he loves basketball, but he's well balanced. He seems to handle the media well. I'll take Quaintance. The other two guys you mentioned are great and are going to have probably long NBA careers. But when I see a 17-year-old that looks and plays like that, man, that's hard to ignore.
Yeah, I want to add to that as well. When Jay Williams was calling the K Arizona State game, he got to talk to Quaintance before the game. He asked him, "What book are you reading?" And he said, "The Outliers" by Malcolm Gladwell. And Jay Williams was just mind blown by his maturity and his ability to learn and want to grow as not just as a player but as an individual. That's a guy you definitely will bet on that will have a successful, not just a pro career, but like whatever he sets out for his life. And I think he's got a very bright future ahead of him.
Yeah, and that's a risky question for Jay Will. And Jay Will's a Duke guy, so he's really an intelligent guy himself. But asking a player these days what their favorite book is, man, you don't know where that could go. And then when it turns out to be something as high level as that, you're kind of like, oh, okay, that tells me a lot more about you.
Because he turned 17 at the beginning of the college basketball season, he's not eligible until the 26th draft, correct?
Boy, as much as the rules change and how fast they are, yes, I believe that's the case. You do have to be 18, and he will be 18 here shortly. I'm not the definitive one to ask on that, but it would be great for him, and I think, and for college basketball and for Arizona State if he comes back and plays another year. I could make an argument for the other two guys you mentioned to do that as well, but they probably will not.
Mm.
Even Cooper Flag the other day, he even gave a little saying he's where he made it sound like he would actually consider coming back for a second year at Duke. When you're going to be the number one overall pick, I think that's kind of hard to pass up. I'll believe it when I see it, but it'd be great if he did for college basketball.
So Kansas State, they got off to a very slow start in conference play. Also in non-con, they went 6-5 and had some head-scratching losses. But they started out 1-6, but then they went on a 6-game winning streak, and now are in a spot where they could make the NCAA tournament. There still has a lot to happen. They're currently tied right now with Utah at the half. So talk about Kansas State and the progress they've made and being one of the hottest teams in college basketball after such a rough start.
Sam Stunning is the word I come up with because I had K State a number of times, and I'll point them out. I had them in non-conference at home against LSU. I had them lose to Drake in overtime in downtown Kansas City. I had them against Houston, which is a really bad matchup at the time for them, and they got basically run out of the building in Manhattan. And at that point, I think I was like everybody else outside the program that were ready to kick dirt on K State and say this is not going to end well. But hey, kudos to Jerome Tang. It took a while, but even though they lost the other night at BYU, that's a really tough place to play, and they'll have a challenge tomorrow at Utah. I didn't see it coming, I'm not one that really talks about faith and religion, but there's no doubt when my conversations with Jerome and with the players that there is an element of that Jerome has used in his teaching. Obviously, he was at Baylor for quite a long time, a Baptist school and steeped in Christianity, and that has been when you ask him what really turned things around, he says it's his Christian message. So again, that's his philosophy. He's used it. Apparently, the players have bought into a lot of that, and he did something that not many guys would do, and that's allow an opposing coach to talk to your team right after the opposing team's coach beats you. Now, I know it was Scott Drew and somebody that he's got a relationship with, and I asked him about that last week at the Arizona game in Manhattan. I said, what all happened to have you bring Scott into the locker room after that game? And he said, it was actually Scott. He said, I'm in the locker room with the team. We had led Baylor a good chunk of that game and lost, and that's, I think, was the sixth straight loss at that point. And an assistant came and said, hey, Scott's right outside. He wants to come into our locker room and talk to the team. And Jerome said he thought about it for about 15 seconds, said, all right. And then he went out and got Scott and brought him in. So it really was Scott that kind of instigated it. And Jerome went in, and whether that's the answer or not, whatever it was, the message was Jerome says it helped my team on and off the floor to come together, and the results speak for themselves.
And one guy, Doug McDaniel, during the
Mm-hmm.
losing skid and early non-con was struggling. And during the losing skid, he averaged 8 points, 2.6 assists a game. But then after during their hot streak, since then, 16.4 points a game, 7 assists, including a double-double against Kansas. So he's been one of the key to their turnaround for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know if I saw that coming either. I saw him early in the year, and I didn't know if he and Jerome Tank could stand each other in the same room. It just seemed like they were butting heads constantly. Uh, but that dynamic has changed as well. They've come to some kind of meeting of the minds. And the Arizona game that I had in Manhattan not quite a week ago, there's a lot of great players on that floor. Arizona's got Caleb Love and other guys that are going to play in the NBA. But Doug McDaniel was by far the best player on the floor that night. And he made some shots, created his own shot. I mean, he was fantastic in that win for K-State.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And yeah, and earlier in the year, I remember after the Drake game, they had that controversy with like the Coleman Hawkins with the whole NIL thing and all the fans like him reading his social media, and then you had Jerome Tang like talk about how like guys they're trying to learn how to handle money.
Yeah, it's a whole different dynamic now, Sam. And the coaching profession has added a lot of different responsibilities to it that I'm sure a lot of coaches never even thought they would have on their plate when they got into coaching. But it is the world we live in right now, and I don't see how coaches do it a lot of times because coaching the X's and O's is now a much smaller part. It's still obviously a big part, and that's why kids are there. But you got a lot of other things consuming your time as a head coach of a basketball team now.
For sure. And there's some coaches who have thrived in that, and some of them haven't. But there's
Yeah.
also issues like some programs or NIL game is in a very good spot. Some are not in a good spot. So it definitely depends on like how the school, some of it is in your control, some of it's out of your control.
Yeah, I look at the ACC in that right now because obviously the SEC right now looks to be the best conference, top to bottom. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And the Big 12 is right there as well. And they're most of the past 5-6 years, the Big 12 has been the best conference, I think, in college basketball. But I look at the ACC, and outside of Duke, North Carolina to a degree. I mean, there are a lot of teams in the ACC that are not in the NIL game. I mean, as far as being able to put that much money out, Stanford isn't. I mean, they came over from the pack. Wake Forest is having a really pretty good season, but those aren't teams that can't compete NIL wise. Even with now, you look at the Big 12 at BYU, where they're going to give $7-8 million to Debanza to come play next year, probably for 1 year. Without NIL now, you're way behind the eight ball.
And no doubt about that. And so back to the Big 12, I want to talk about a team that's been kind of a little bit of a surprise, Texas Tech. They have one of my favorite coaches in Grant McCaslin, who I had the opportunity to meet at the Final Four Fan Fest in Phoenix last year. So I was waiting in line. It was at the AT&T booth where they actually interviewed Coach McCaslin before he signed autographs. And it was funny. He was talking about a story when he was a player at Baylor, and he pointed me out because I was wearing my Kansas gear. And he's like, "Look at that Kansas fan right here, I see." And I want to talk about a story when I played at Allen Fieldhouse, and I was sitting at the corner, and I got the ball, and I attempted a three, and this Rafe LaFrentz was coming, and he swatted the ball, and the ball just didn't even come close to the rim. So that was one of the stories I remember.
Yeah, I don't think Grant was giving up inches to Rafe LaFrentz. It was more like feet,
Yeah.
in that regard. But no, I'm
Then
with you. Texas Tech had been kind of flying under the radar for most of the season, I think, until they won at Houston without Toppin and Grant for most of that game, obviously, with the circumstances that happened early. So he's tremendous. I'm a big fan of Grant's as well. I think he does a tremendous job. I think he's great with the X's and O's. He's great with the players, fans, media. He's got a good thing going at Texas Tech.
Yeah. I had an opportunity to ask him a question. They allowed that while we were getting an autograph. And I asked him about if he rooted for the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 58, as that was the Super Bowl that had previous happened. And he said, absolutely. He talks about his friendship with Patrick Mahomes and how he continues to support Texas Tech athletics. And then he shared with me how if he asked me if I remember Andy Reid being at the Baylor or not Texas Tech BYU that Thursday Big 12 tournament game, and he mentioned that, and so definitely when you got Patrick Mahomes on your side, you're doing something right at Texas Tech. And that game against Houston, the fact that they were able to lose their best player and their head coach and come out with a win in overtime, that is a very significant win, and that's something that just builds your program for years to come. That was a monumental win for Grant McCaslin and what he's trying to build at Texas Tech.
Yeah, and obviously Houston won a bunch of games at home in a row. It seemed very unlikely after Toppin was unfortunately given a flagrant two. It didn't seem to be the proper call at that time, and then Grant responded as he did and got tossed. And at that point, you're thinking, wow, there's no way Texas Tech wins this game, and that's not the way it worked out. It did take overtime. It was a really highly entertaining game, but Grant stood up for his player. I don't know many coaches that would go to that extreme, but he saw the replay on the sideline, and he let the officials know about it, apparently to a degree that was too far for the officials to ignore and toss them.
For sure, and that leads to the talk about the officiating, which feels like every year in college
Mm-hmm.
basketball that's just been a topic of concern. Fran Fraschilla on his Twitter, he's a little bit talking about just defending the officials and talking about how as fans, which I think there is definitely truth to it, that we wouldn't to want to officiate a little league game, which that can be a little bit can be a pretty interesting place with parents and stuff, which and then making the college and NBA level officiating just as much like more brutal. But I think the most not just it's not really the bad calls, I would say, but I think going to the monitor so many times during a game, which just kills the flow of the game. Talk about like just just the amount of monitor visits that the officials go throughout the game and how it can be frustrating not just as a broadcaster and as a fan to watch basketball with that much stoppage.
Yeah, Sam, I'll handle that in two parts. My relationship with officials, I think, is really good. I've considered guys like Jerry Pollard before he retired this year, and John Higgins, and Doug Sermons now, and Kip Kissinger, and Darren George, all these different guys that I see in the Big 12 quite a bit as friends. I mean, we always converse before the game a little bit, and how's your family, all that. And as long as you don't make it personal, I think they understand. I mean, the officials know they're going to miss calls. This game just moves so fast. It's going to happen. I mean, if you can shoot 90% on your calls in college basketball, I think you're doing really, really well. But as long as you don't make it personal, I think they're okay with it. You can say, "Hey, I think you missed that call," and that friendship is still going to go on. You're right about the going to the monitor. It's an epidemic. It's caused game times to really increase well past the 2 hour mark that we're used to 2:15, 2:20, 2:30 sometimes. I think there's several reasons for that. Number one, they just want to get things precise, and there's really no restrictions on how many times you can use the monitor. And the other part I always bring up is how prevalent gambling is among sports watchers, and that officials feel like they have to make sure everything's done correctly because you don't want to upset some whack job that's got $5 on the game that he can't live without, and you screwed up his prop bet on Joe Blow's rebounds or something. So I really do think that's a big reason they tend to go to the monitors quite a bit.
So last Saturday was Alabama Auburn, and that game started at 3 o'clock. And then once that game got over, I look at my watch and it was like 5:50.
Yeah.
And that game almost lasts 3 hours. And you know when a game lasts a very long time, when the game like before is almost at the half when they finally go on the actual ESPN network from going from the ESPN News or the app to like the actual ESPN channel where it's supposed to be broadcast. That game is going way too long and that game needs to be find a way to be shortened a little bit.
Yeah, we've all been victims of that as announcers at ESPN, where unless you have the first game of the day, you're probably going to get what we call JIPs, JIP, joined to progress. And it happens all the time. Most games have potential slides. So if there's, say, like a 105 tip with a potential slide to 110, but you can only go a slide about an extra 5 minutes. So even that doesn't seem to make a huge difference because the game's been going so long.
I would say my solution to the whole monitor thing is kind of go somewhere where the NBA is going. You give coaches challenge, so maybe you give one per half, and then if you succeed in the challenge, you get one extra challenge, and if you lose a challenge, you lose a timeout, and you don't get to challenge the rest of the game. There's not really a great answer for it, but I think we look at the NBA that's like done pretty well. I think if college basketball goes to a model like that, I think that would work out pretty well.
That would seem to be a reasonable compromise. But the TV people and my bosses at ESPN, they don't want to see these games go this long. They want the flow. And even as announcers and fans, I don't think you really think, oh, how long was this game? As long as it has flow and keeps moving, I don't care if a game goes 2.5 hours, if it goes to overtime or whatever, just as long as you can kind of keep that flow. But obviously, too many trips to the monitor and everything just comes to a screeching halt.
You don't control this because you're a broadcaster, but could you see ESPN, how the NBA will do it on a marquee game on ESPN or TNT? It's I believe a 6:30, and then they make it at 9, or it's either 6 or 9:30. So they don't make it the window so tight together. Like, could you see ESPN if they do a broadcast at 6, they could make that 8 p.m. game 8:30?
It's getting to that, Stephen, where you may have to do that, but because of the conferences and the agreements from the number of games, if you do that, you're basically for a whole day, like on a Saturday, where you're going from basically 11 a.m. Central Time to midnight Central Time with wall-to-wall college hoops. You're basically taking a game out of that, and you're going to have to put somebody somewhere else. It's an excellent idea, but then if you have a regular game that goes 2 hours and 5 minutes, and you got 25 minutes to fill, then you have to have studio or something, or otherwise guys are juggling, trying to kill a lot of time, which is not fun. I've been in that position a few times too. So it may come to that, which is why I think that's the network's trump card when you're talking with the conference. Is like, well, we can give you a 2.5 hour window instead of 2 hours, but that means two of your teams aren't going to be on our network because we're going to have to cut a game out over a 10-hour period of giving an extra half hour, or heck, two games if it's that long. So, and at that point, that gets the conference's attention. It's like, okay, maybe we need to limit trips to the monitor. Maybe we do what Sam just said, and you get so many challenges per half.
So I want to go back to the Big 12 and the NCAA tournament. With that's coming up a month from now. Who would you say are the three teams in the Big 12 who could make the Final Four or make a deep run?
Yeah, we have enough time in the regular season. Somebody else could get hot and change my opinion, but I think it's Houston. I think it's Texas Tech. And I'm still a big believer in Iowa State, and even though they had that stumble after the Arizona loss in overtime and lost to K-State at home, and had like a 3-game swing where they weren't playing all that well. I would believe in those three teams at this point to make a deep run.
I think Arizona is one that's kind of a wild card too. It just depends on where Caleb Love goes. But the last two games, Caleb Love's been 1 of 15 from three, which is kind of like a trend where every loss it feels like Caleb Love has just been ice cold from three, just can't get a shot to fall down. They're a struggling outside shooting team, this team, which feels like a team that has like guys who are capable shooters, but shooting 31% from three. Jaden Bradley was 46% last year, 30% this year. KJ Lewis was 34% last season, shooting under 20% this year. Trey Towson, who came from Oakland, was a 37% shooter, is shooting 26%. Even though the shots have not fallen, they can easily be a team that could be on the other side of that in March and be able to win tournament games and make a deep run and get hot from three in March. But they're a team that easily can lose in the first round based on their like shooting currently right now.
Yeah.
But I don't know which Arizona team you're gonna get. So if you're filling out your bracket, if you have them going far, you're basically saying that Caleb Love is gonna and other guys are going to start hitting threes. And if you don't have them going too far, you're assuming that they're just going to stick with where they are shooting wise.
Yeah, and Sam, I had Arizona back to back about a week apart, and the Arizona at BYU game where Caleb Love was really good, and they held off BYU at the end. And then the game at Kansas State, he and the rest of the team were not hitting threes, and changed the complexion of that game. And K-State was able to come away with that win. So you're right. I mean, I think, outside of the three teams I mentioned, those other teams are that kind of wild card. Like, well, it depends on how they shoot that night. So the matchup, how you shoot, you could be out in round two, or maybe make a Final Four run. A lot of these teams in the Big 12.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And who would you say? Give me a few players who you think could be a Big 12 Player of the Year this year.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's running away with it right now. And there are certain players that are playing really well, like a Javon Small at West Virginia, but you're on a team that's not going to finish in the top 3 or 4 teams of the conference. And how much does that affect the voters as far as who they're going to pick for Player of the Year? Maybe it's a Toppin from Texas Tech. I mean, you could take Sharp from Houston. There's a number of players. It'll be interesting. Again, there's nobody like a like a Jalen Wilson a couple of years ago, where you kind of knew 3/4 of the way through the season that he was going to win the award.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't think you can pinpoint somebody right now and say, yeah, this guy's definitely going to win Big 12 Player of the Year.
Who would you say is your coach of the year?
Several good candidates. Yeah, I mean, I I can't argue with somebody who wants to vote for Kelvin Sampson again as coach of the year, but I would vote for Grant McCasland if I had a vote. I think just because Texas Tech, I think, has overachieved compared to where people thought they were going to be before the season began. And Grant now in year two with Toppin and his team, uh, I, they're really good, man. They can beat anybody on any given night. They did that in Houston and under weird circumstances, like we were talking about. But and they win on the road. I mean, they've won a pretty decent number of games on the road in the Big 12, which I think is really where you separate the good teams from the great teams.
Yeah, Brant McCaslin would be my pick this year, and I think it's kind of good to like just let spread out a little bit. You could easily give Calvin Sampson an award every year, like you could have given Bill Self the reward every year in the mid 2000s to the 2010s. Like I think it's good to give someone else the award, especially he's done such a significant job, and year two has always been a historically a really hard year for most coaches. That's typically like the down year
Mm-hmm.
that programs have when they're trying to build their program up. But Grant McCasland, he's made that next step in that year too. He's had a good first year and has even a better second year. And he's laid a really good foundation that was set by Chris Beard and Mark Adams. And now he's kind of like taken that to Texas Tech basketball, kept that tradition going. And it seems like that's something that's going to be sustained for a very long period.
Yeah, what are we looking at? Like what, five, six games left in conference play. Since you're going to play 20 games in conference season, a lot can happen in that amount of time. But yeah, I would take Grant at this point.
So first year Big 12 has done 20 games. How do you like having these amount of teams here, or do you miss the old round robin 10 team style we had 2 years ago?
The latter. I do miss that. I really do because there was nowhere to hide. You knew you were going to play everybody in the conference once at home and once on the road, and it was the best. Now I understand why. I mean, Brett Yormark did what he had to do. He outwitted the the Pac-12, and we see where the Pac-12 is now. It's it's 20 a game. That's a lot of games, man.
Yeah.
I remember all that not long ago when it was 16 games in conference season of the Big 12, and that seemed like a lot. I don't think they're going to stay with 20 for very long. Maybe they will again next year. I don't see them playing 20 games in conference permanently. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of conference games, and then you also add the Big 12 tournament with having two more teams, which means the Tuesday session will have they'll have two sessions, a morning and like early afternoon session will go with the evening session.
Yeah, it's when you got 16 teams. Selfishly, I'm kind of happy for that. I'll get to do the two games on the first night on Tuesday night, so I get a chance to just drive across town and get a couple of games of the Big 12 tournament in, which I haven't been able to do before. So because there's 16 teams, they add an extra announcer, and I'm happy to be that this year.
Yeah, no doubt. You also got to call some SEC games this year.
Mhm.
SEC this year has proven to be the best conference in college basketball. According to Joe Lunardi, he has 14 teams from the SEC conference in the field of 68, which is pretty incredible. But I expect that to not be the number when the final bracket is revealed. But that just tells you how good the SEC has been this year. Talk a little bit about the SEC. What has made the SEC more than just a football conference?
Well, it used to basically be Kentucky and maybe another contender every year, and things have vastly changed. I do think Auburn with Janai Broome on paper is the best team in the nation, and I think they have proven that. That doesn't mean they can't get knocked off before the Final Four. It would surprise me. I'll just take Mizzou as an example. Somebody in our backyard here, they didn't win a conference game last year. So I had them against LSU, which was their first home conference game. Mizzou had gone to Auburn to start conference play, and they beat LSU, and that was their first conference win in like 20 something games in SEC play. And they've been really good. I mean, Mizzou they're in the tournament. I mean, they're going to be in the NCAA tournament this year. And for Dennis Gates, who had a great first year, obviously didn't even win a conference game last year. Mizzou's kind of indicative of where the SEC is. I mean, you can go from not winning a game in conference one year to being in the NCAA tournament the next. And I mean, Mizzou's got a chance to. I mean, they could be a 4 seed if things really go well for them the rest of the way.
Yeah, they've done a really good job. Dennis Gates, from going from last year's team to just hitting on the portal, like bringing back Mark Mitchell, hit on Tony
Yeah,
Perkins, and then Caleb Grill got hurt last year, and then he was able to use the medical red shirt. Not having him this year is a significant difference and brings that outside
no
shooting
doubt.
presence, but also brings that leadership as well. And
He had that injury where he got carted off, and
mhm,
he had just come back the LSU game I had, which was right after, by the way, a couple of days after we had a foot of snow in Kansas City.
mhm.
So the streets of Columbia, I remember, were still kind of jacked up with a lot of snow. But Caleb Grill is a guy. I mean, he could go off for 6 or 7 threes on you just like that. I mean, he's that good a shooter. And they got Tamar Bates and other guys, and we saw what they did to Kansas. I mean, the two bigs down low, Mark Mitchell being one of those, just absolutely ate Kansas up. So no, Mizzou's legit. I mean, they're legit, and it wouldn't shock me to see them in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, so you've had the privilege to call some games that have been not normal with the expansion of the conferences. I know you called the Arizona BYU game. Talk about your experiences covering that, and then also, do you have any plans on going to other Big 12 venues the rest of this season?
Yeah, so my schedule, I just actually switched to softball for the last 3 or 4 days for Clearwater the Invitational. So I did 8 games in 3 days. The last two were yesterday on Sunday. So I actually have this week, thankfully, because it's going to snow in Kansas City again, and traveling would have been a nightmare again tomorrow.
Mhm.
I'm off till Sunday with Arizona State at K-State. A couple days after that, Iowa State at Oklahoma State. 2 days after that, I'll be at Wichita State. And then the following Saturday, I'm somewhere else, but it doesn't come to it's a busy end to the season. I know I will finish the regular season with the very last game on the schedule, and that is at BYU. Utah at BYU. We don't tip until 9 o'clock that Saturday night, the last Saturday of the regular season. So it will be the final game. And it's interesting. I hadn't gone west a lot, but it's a different beast because a lot of those games it turned. Remember the old Pac-12 at
Yeah.
night, Pac-12 after dark.
Mhm.
It is the Big 12 after dark. We didn't tip until 9:15 the Arizona BYU game in Provo a couple Tuesdays ago.
Yeah, it's crazy. I remember I was watching a game. You were enjoying a cougar tail during parts of the game,
Mhm.
and I was thinking to myself, man, maybe I can get some of that.
Yeah.
That's a lot of sugar. That is a lot of sugar, Stephen, and especially at 9:15 at night when the game started. You eat that at halftime, and you'll be bouncing off the walls till about 2 a.m. there out west.
So, how many games have you done in Cincy?
I had not done a game in Cincinnati this year.
Oh.
I had Cincinnati a couple of times last year. I like Wes Miller.
Mhm.
That's a team that has talent, and they've they just have found a way to lose games. They're so close in so many. But I mean, that's a good team. And it seems weird because they've only won what 5 conference games.
Yeah.
I know, and I know it's been hard on Wes because I remember
Mhm.
talking to him last year. He's like, I thought I knew what it was going to be like in the Big 12, but it's even
Yeah.
more crazy.
Did you get a chance to try Skyline Chili while you're in Cincy?
Yeah. Now I have had Cincinnati games in the past, and I will say this: it's all right. I don't mind
Mhm.
Skyline Chili, but everybody there pumps it up like, we're from Kansas City, so we talk
Mhm.
about our barbecue, and it's really good.
Mhm.
We can send you to Q39 or Joe's or Jack Stacks or whatever. You're going to get really good food.
Yeah.
Skyline chili, yeah, it's beans, it's it's chili on top. It's okay.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be like my favorite thing in the world, even if I lived in Cincinnati. But
Yeah.
it's kind of what they do. I don't poo-poo it,
Yeah.
but it's okay.
Yeah, I was there last summer and I tried Skyline chili and I just remember just so much they just put so much cheese on the top
Oh
of
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. A
I
mountain
got
of cheese,
yeah.
the noodles, the bean. Yeah, yeah. It's creative.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
one. If I have it once while I'm there, that's probably it. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I got the 4x4 with the chili cheese dog. That was
Oh man, you're a glutton, man.
yeah. And
Oh, you're a regular Cincinnatian, man. They
yeah.
love stuff.
Um, so since you mentioned you do the softball games now at the beginning of the season for at the college level, and you were in Clearwater, Florida. Uh, I am curious, what did you have a reality shock when you were going from Clearwater, Florida to the 10-degree weather that we're experiencing in Kansas?
Well, here's the interesting part of that. So the last 3 years, I've done Clearwater on site. So this year, with my hoop schedule, I actually did those 8 games from home. So when I finished the eighth and final game of the 3 days yesterday at about 2 o'clock Central Time, I walked upstairs from my basement where I have the home kit, and didn't have to worry about traveling, which was, I'll say this: calling games from home is not what you go to journalism school thinking, hey, I want to call games in my basement. No, you want to call games on site where crowds around you and you feel the energy and all that. It's become a necessary evil after the pandemic, because we were able to do games during the pandemic when restrictions were on attendance. But the reason at Clearwater is they have 2 fields that have press boxes and they have 2 fields that don't. So when you are assigned to a field that doesn't have a press box, they get around that by having to do the game from home. So that's what I did this year.
There's a YouTube channel that's called Matt Highlights 2 that posts college football, college basketball, and college softball games. And one of the games that you did, they posted the whole highlights, and I heard your voice on the introduction.
Which games were these?
It was at the Clearwater tournament.
Oh,
That you just did.
this past weekend. Okay, well, that would have been done from my basement.
Yeah,
In past
okay.
years, I did it from Clearwater.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. I didn't.
yeah.
Your audio was amazing. I had no idea that you were in your basement. Did not know that.
Fortunately, the technology for the at-home games has gotten better through the years. When we first did it, I remember having an Iowa State at Kansas game at Allen Fieldhouse. Of course, they only allowed like 3,500 fans in Allen Fieldhouse at that time. And ESPN had restrictions where we couldn't do any games at Allen Fieldhouse that year because you had to be so far away from the court and from the fans. And Allen Fieldhouse, you're at center court, and fans' knees are in your back where you call the game there. They're in the first row there. So I did a game from home that was 30 minutes from my house at Allen Fieldhouse, and the video and audio went out at different times. And it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. It's fortunate it does still have some glitches occasionally, but fortunately the technology has gotten more reliable.
So just to wrap it up here, since the main theme has been Big 12.
Mm-hmm.
Final couple weeks of the season, uh, looking at that perspective and the conference tournament, or what are you really focused on looking for the rest of the Big 12 season from teams that are currently in the field or teams that are trying to get in the field?
I think our 2 local teams are intriguing for a lot of different reasons. Number one is, can Kansas State continue their trend up, even though they did lose their last game, and actually get themselves in the tournament, which would be absolutely remarkable to be able to do that after a 1-6 start. I still think, regardless of how they finish this regular season, they're probably going to need to win 2 games at the tournament to solidify it, because their non-conference is non-existent. They get no help from their non-conference schedule. They did not have a win in non-conference that helps their resume. So it's all got to be Big 12. And even if they somehow finish above 500 in the conference the rest of the way, they're going to need to do some stuff in the tournament. And then for Kansas, what's going on? They've never been worse than a 4 seed under Bill Self. And right now they're looking at being a 5 or maybe a 6 if they don't get things under control here. Are the pieces going to come back together? I mean, there was a stretch during the season after the home loss to West Virginia to start the season where you thought, okay, they're getting it together. But last handful of games, it's not been heartening for Kansas fans.
Well, Mark, we've really appreciated you coming on the podcast, and also whenever we have the chance to check an ESPN broadcast, we always enjoy hearing your voice and hearing your insight calling the game.
Always a pleasure. It's fun. It's great to see you guys. I love your passion for Big 12 basketball. It's something we all share, and it's a fun time of year, and even getting into a spot now where I think there'll be some surprises. Some teams that are kind of in the middle of the conference. Maybe that's Kansas. Maybe that's K-State. I don't know who it is that all of a sudden will make a nice deep run in the tournament.
Yep. Mark, it was always great talking to you. I always love your perspective and your insight on the Big 12 and just college sports in general. And I always enjoy talking to you, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Sam, Steven, always a pleasure to talk to you guys again. Appreciate your passion for the sport and for the conference, and always enjoy being on the podcast, man. The Mecca is the home. I love it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Well, stay warm, Mark.
Do our best. You guys too. Take care.
All right. Take care.